Happy birthday, America. This is a special 4th of July edition of Take Me Through It. And we are podcasting live from Plymouth Notch, Vermont. Why Plymouth Notch? Well, because, as you probably know, it is the home of the only president of the United States who ever been born on the 4th of July. Who's that? Calvin Coolidge, of course. It's a special 4th of July Calvin Coolidge edition of Take Me Through It. I'm BJ Fennell. Calvin Coolidge was born here in Plymouth Notch on the 4th of July in 1872. He was born over there in that small building attached to his father's general store. That building, the store, and the adjacent post office still stand today, all of them little changed from 145 years ago. Our first stop is the Welcome Center, where there is an introductory film about Calvin Coolidge and how he spent his early years here in Plymouth Notch.
How this man became president is the remarkable story of a farm boy from rural America who studied in a one-room schoolhouse, who learned that success came from hard work, and who overcame the grief of losing his mother when he was 12. To this day, the village where Coolidge was born retains its early 20s.
From the one-room schoolhouse in Plymouth Notch, young Calvin moved on to Black River Academy in Ludlow, and then on to Amherst College. He read the law and established a practice in Northampton, Massachusetts, where he was bitten by the political bug. He was elected state representative, state senator, lieutenant governor, and finally governor of Massachusetts. He was Warren Harding's surprise pick as running mate in the 1920 presidential election. And when President Harding died in office in August of 1923, Coolidge, who was visiting his family in Plymouth Notch at the time, was sworn into the office of President of the United States by his father, a notary public. And as I walk outside the Welcome Center, who do I run into but the President himself, President Calvin Coolidge, as portrayed by Tracy Messer. Mr. President, happy birthday.
Thank you very kindly. I appreciate your being here for the celebration.
You are among the extraordinary group of presidents who took the oath of office almost by surprise, without preparation. Obviously, anybody who's elected vice president understands there's always that chance. But on the early morning hours of August 3rd, 1923, there you were in your living room, being sworn into office by your father, a notary public. What was that like for you?
It was a very humbling experience, and to be surrounded at my birthplace by my family in the time of crisis was very comforting. I said a prayer. I met with the news reporters so they were informed of the situation. And then I went back to bed.
And eventually made it back to the White House to begin your presidency. And if we were to look back on your presidency, what would you say were the highlights? How do you want to be remembered, Mr. President?
I would say that the greatest achievement of my administration was minding my own business.
In true Vermont style, and we appreciate that. However, you took over at a time of scandal, the Harding administration, especially with Teapot Dome. There was a crisis, perhaps of confidence, not just the fact that the president had passed away unexpectedly, but a crisis of confidence. How did you attack that? How do you think you rectified that situation?
The people of the United States placed their trust in me to continue the policies of the Harding administration. And I felt it was important to adhere to the goal of normalcy. And in time, the law had to take its course.
And then by 1928, you decided not to run for re-election. Can you explain why you felt that your job was done?
Well, I felt that perhaps the next president of the United States might be required to spend money. And I simply didn't feel qualified.
Thank you, Mr. President, and happy birthday.
Thank you kindly, sir.
President Calvin Coolidge, as portrayed by Tracy Messer. Thank you, Mr. President. But today was special not just because it is the 4th of July and we celebrate America's birth, or we celebrate the birth date 145 years ago of Calvin Coolidge. It's also the day when 20 new Americans join the list of citizens in this country. They came from 10 countries, and they came here today just within steps of where Calvin Coolidge was born, where he grew up, and where he took the oath of president. They came here today to take their oath of citizenship. Matthew Denhart, Executive Director of the Coolidge Presidential Foundation, offered words of welcome and inspiration to the 20 immigrants who are about to become Americans.
When the Continental Congress declared America's independence on July 4th, 1776, among the grievances with the English crown was one related to immigration. I've been reminded this by Seth Lipsky, who's here today and is a constitutional scholar. But indeed, in the Declaration of Independence, the Congress laid forth the accusation that King George III had, and I quote, endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither. It should come as no surprise that the founders would consider the right to migrate of very high importance. Indeed, we're a young country that needed people. After all, 8 of the 55 original signers of the Declaration were not born here in the area we now know as the United States, so they, in effect, themselves were immigrants.
Now for the roll call of oath. If you would please stand when I call your name. Ibrahim Abdi. Puspa Adhikari. Radhika Adhikari.
And one by one, their names are read off. They come from Somalia, Bhutan, India, Brazil, Canada, and Great Britain.
Maria.
And they're all here for the same reason today, to take the oath of citizenship in the United States.
Natalia Ellis. Edna King. Timothy Medlin.
So if you'd raise your right hand, please. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty, and I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. So help me God. Congratulations.
And from that stirring ceremony, let's take a quick visit up to the Coolidge homestead. So I'm standing in the parlor, just a few feet away from where Calvin Coolidge stood as his father administered the oath of the office of President of the United States in the early morning hours of August 3rd, 1923. There's a writing desk, there's a table, there's a small bed, there's a door that opens and looks into another room. I can see a stand-up piano in there, a rocking chair. This room preserved just as it was on that historic night in 1923. And check this out, an actual film recording with sound of President Calvin Coolidge espousing his views on taxation and government. This was filmed on the lawn of the White House in 1924.
The costs of government are all assessed upon the people. This means that the farmer is doomed to provide a certain amount of money out of the sale of his produce, no matter how low the price, to pay his taxes. The manufacturer, the professional man, the clerk must do the same from their income. The expenses of the government reach everybody. Taxes take from everyone a part of his earnings and force everyone to work for a certain part of his time for the government. When we come to realize that the yearly expenses of the governments of this country, the stupendous sum of about $7.5 billion, we get $700 million is needed by the national government and the remainder by local governments. Such a sum is difficult to comprehend. These are some of the reasons why I want to cut down public expense. I want the people of America to be able to work less for the government and more for themselves.
After our interview, I wished I had asked President Coolidge what he thought of the name-calling and bombastic boasting and uncivil discourse in today's political scene. Well, I got my answer from the Coolidge Presidential Foundation website, coolidgefoundation.org. Here's what the website says. Coolidge told Americans he never was hurt by what he didn't say. In his autobiography, the president recalled that in one early campaign, quote, "We made the mistake of talking too much about the deficiencies of our opponents and not enough about the merits of our own candidates. I have never again fallen into that error." I think perhaps I should leave the presidential portrayals to Tracy Messer. I'm walking up the steps to the North Cemetery here in Plymouth Notch to pay my respects at the gravesite of President Coolidge. And if you're expecting some large monument, some giant edifice that shows that the President of the United States is buried here, you'll be disappointed. It's a simple grave. I'll read it. Calvin Coolidge, July 4th, 1872, January 5th, 1933. That's it. It's a simple, beautiful tombstone made of Vermont granite. It has a star in each corner and the presidential seal that says E pluribus unum. That's really the only indication that a president of the United States is buried in this spot. All it says is Calvin Coolidge, July 4th, 1872, January 5th, 1933. And he's buried alongside his wife, Grace, their son, Calvin Coolidge, Jr., who died while the president was in office in 1924. And then, of course, the president's father, John Coolidge, who administered the oath of office back in that fateful day, 1923. It's quiet here now, and in a couple of minutes, the Vermont National Guard marching band is going to lead a procession from the Coolidge homestead here at the cemetery, and there'll be ceremonies and speeches and a wreath laying at the president's gravestone. But I kind of prefer it the way it is right now, by myself, a beautiful July 4th here in Plymouth Notch, Vermont. Just me alone with the president, sharing our thoughts. It's time to say goodbye from Plymouth Notch, Vermont, and the President Calvin Coolidge presidential site. I hope you've enjoyed this special edition of Take Me Through It. We wish you all a very happy 4th of July and a great summer. Talk to you next time. I'm BJ Fennell.